Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are back with another Commander Precon upgrade video. This time we will be upgrading the Revival Trance deck from the Final Fantasy set. Let's get into it. Really fast, before discussing the commander we will be using, let's quickly go over the Precon upgrade format that we use here at Shuffle Source. The first item to note is we will either use the primary or the backup commander here for these videos. Next, we keep a cap of around $100 or less that we use when choosing the upgrades. We will be adding 10 cards and we will be removing 10 cards. Additionally, we add a few more upgrades that we like to call no budget options near the end of the video, and that's for people who either already have these cards or maybe have a little extra in their budget for continued upgrades. And lastly, we do use market value pricing provided by TCG Player at the time of recording, which is going to be displayed at the bottom of the screen as we're discussing the cards. So the commander we will be discussing today is Terra, Herald of Hope. For red, white, and a black, we have a 3/3 legendary human wizard warrior that has Trance. At the beginning of combat on your turn, mill 2 cards. Terra gains flying until end of turn. Whenever Terra deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2. When you do, return target creature card with power 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So right away, one of her standout features is going to be that Trance ability, because at the beginning of combat on your turn, we're going to get to mill 2 cards, and Terra will gain flying until end of turn. Her first ability helps us with filling our graveyard, and the flying helps her to be able to connect in combat, which is exactly what we want to do with this deck. Now, the real graveyard engine with this deck is going to be Terra's combat damage trigger. Whenever Terra deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2, and if you do, you get to return a creature card with power 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. With this ability, we can consistently bring back utility creatures, creatures with removal, or other synergy pieces over and over again. So what I love about Terra is how repeatable and flexible her recursion really is. We don't need to cast any big spells or rely on anything with high mana cost. We just need to keep our graveyard stocked and to get her reliably connecting in combat. So the way we're going to upgrade this deck is by adding more ways to fill our graveyard. We're also adding power 3 or less creatures with powerful enter the battlefield effects that will give us value every time Terra reanimates them. In addition, we want to make sure we're adding support pieces to help protect Terra, so that we can make sure she can swing in each turn and keep the recursion engine running. So here we have the first of our additions coming in at $5.79. We have Aurelia, the War Leader. For 2 red and 2 white, we have a 3/4 legendary creature angel that has flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever Aurelia attacks for the first time each turn, untap all creatures you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So the synergy that Aurelia provides is going to be generating those extra combat turns. And with Terra as our commander, that's a big deal, because whenever Aurelia attacks for the first time each combat, we get to untap all of our creatures and get an additional combat phase. That means Terra's ability can trigger twice in a single turn, letting us recur 2 creatures instead of just the 1 if we have the mana. Additionally, what really helps is that Aurelia has exactly 3 power, which means she qualifies as a valid recursion target with Terra. That's important because at 6 mana, casting her from our hand isn't really the ideal situation. But if we can mill her early, we can bring her out for just 2 mana as long as we connect with Terra's combat trigger. Now, even if you do end up paying the 6 mana, she will come in with flying, vigilance, and haste. So that haste will allow her to swing right away, and we can trigger that at second combat. Overall, I think Aurelia is a good add here. I love that we can use her as a reanimation target, and she can really help us push the damage through that this deck needs. And here we have the next of our additions coming in at 94 cents. We have Buried Alive. For 2 colorless and 1 black, we have a sorcery that says search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, then shuffle. So Buried Alive is an amazing support piece for this deck. For 3 mana, it's going to let us search our library for 3 creature cards and send them straight to the graveyard. This helps give us options for what Terra can reanimate later. So whether we get this early game or late game, this is always a great card to find because it's going to allow us to search for whatever answer we need and put it right into our graveyard. So all around, it's a powerful graveyard tutor that really helps us get the most out of Terra's recursion engine. And here we have our next edition coming in at $9.60. We have Grim Hireling. For 3 colorless and 1 black, we have a 3/2 creature Tiefling Rogue that has whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create 2 treasure tokens. Then you can pay a black, sacrifice X treasure tokens, target creature gets -X until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So treasure tokens are a great way to help us ramp and color fix in a 3-color deck, and Grim Hireling is excellent at getting us treasure, and that's because whenever 1 or more of our creatures deal combat damage to a player, we get to create 2 treasure tokens. Now during the combat phase, Terra has flying, so we can likely have at least 1 clean target to hit to get us at least 2 treasures. Also, being only 3 power means Grim Hireling is a good target for Terra to pick with her recursion ability. Now in a deck that wants to attack and recur creatures constantly, these treasures can actually add up pretty quickly. Treasures will help us cast multiple spells per turn, recover from board wipes, or just power out some massive plays. And additionally, if we really need to, we can sacrifice those treasures to fuel Grim Hireling's activated ability, which will allow us to give -X to a target creature based on the amount of sacrificed treasure tokens. This can be a useful way to get around indestructible creatures, for example. Here we have our next edition for $2.52. We have Lauren of the Third Path for 2 colorless and 1 white. We have a 2/1 legendary creature Human Artificer that has Vigilance. When Lauren of the Third Path enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. She also has an activated ability of you and target opponent each draw a card. So for 3 mana, she's going to come in with that ETB trigger of allowing us to destroy an artifact or an enchantment. So with her only having 2 power, that also means she's another valid target to recur with Terra, which means if we keep finding good artifact or enchantments to destroy, Lauren ends up being a great pick to keep bringing back to the battlefield. The activated ability she has also helps us get a little bit of card draw in this deck. Now, while it is a bit of a downside that we also have to give an opponent a card with this ability, it can really be used to our advantage if we try to use it politically to curry some favors out of our opponents. For example, we can say, hey, you don't swing at me next turn and I'll give you a card. You'd be surprised how many people would actually take that deal. So in this deck, I like to think of Lauren as a repeatable removal piece with some card draw upside. Here we have our next edition coming in at $20.65. We have Mesmeric Orb for 2 colorless. We have an artifact that says, whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. So Mesmeric Orb is one of the best mill engines that we could truly add to this deck. Every time a permanent becomes untapped, whether it's a land, creature, an artifact, doesn't matter. As long as it's a permanent, its controller mills a card. That means during our untap step, we will be consistently filling our graveyard just by playing the game. The great thing about this card is as we continue to build out our board, it sort of scales with the amount of permanents we control as long as we can tap them. It's also great to know that it only takes 2 mana and there's no more investment ever needed for this card. Now it is important to know that Mesmeric Orb affects all players, so that can be a downside if we're facing against another graveyard focused deck, but honestly for us, the upside that we get from it far outweighs the risk. Now, while milling our opponents is not exactly a core theme to our strategy, we actually do have a few great cards that will take advantage of our opponents having to mill as well. 2 cards, for example, that will benefit greatly from our opponents having a graveyard are Rise of the Dark Realms and Kefka Dancing Mad. Here we have the next of our removals coming in at $6.44. We have Ripples of Undeath. For 1 colorless and 1 black, we have an enchantment that says, at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards. Then you may pay 1 and 3 life. If you do, put a card from among those cards into your hand. So Ripples of Undeath is a great early setup piece for this deck. Since our strategy relies on us self-milling to kind of fuel our recursion, we need reliable engines to help fill the graveyard. For only 2 mana, Ripples of Undeath is going to allow us to start milling 3 cards every turn. Now, if the milling wasn't good enough, we also have the optional value of returning a milled card to our hand. If we happen to mill something absolutely critical, we can just simply pay 1 and 3 life and get it back, meaning this card is great for graveyard setup and card advantage. Honestly, this card is still one of my favorite cards to come out of Modern Horizons 3. If you are running a self-milled deck that has black in it, this is a must include. And next, for $7.28, we have Sister Hospitaller. For 4 colorless, a white, and a black, we have a 3/2 creature human cleric that has Medicus Ministorum. Whenever Sister Hospitaller enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You gain life equal to its mana value. So this is another great creature that has a strong enters the battlefield effect that also happens to have exactly 3 power, which means we can bring her back from the graveyard using Terra's ability. That's really important because at 6 mana, casting Sister from our hand is not exactly ideal. But if we can mill her and then bring her back with our commander, that's incredible value for only 2 mana. Now, when Sister enters the battlefield, she gets to bring another creature with her back from our graveyard with no restriction on the power. And we gain life equal to the creature's mana value. And that's really what helps this be a very good card, is the chaining of the value that we get by recurring this with our commander. Terra's going to bring back Sister Hospitaller, and then Sister Hospitaller is going to bring something else back. It's just really strong to potentially get 2 creatures back for 1 Terra combat trigger. Our next edition coming in at 25 cents is Skyclave Apparition. For 1 and 2 white, we have a 2/2 creature core spirit Whenever Skyclave Apparition enters the battlefield, exile up to one target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with converted mana cost 4 or less. When Skyclave Apparition leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner creates a XX blue illusion creature token, where X is the converted mana cost of the exiled card. So I like this card because it's an efficient removal piece, and it's also a great recursion target with our commander. The removal is also an exile effect and not a destroy, which is also an added benefit. Now, even if you have to cast it for the 3 mana, it's going to let us exile a non-land, non-token permanent an opponent controls, as long as it's mana value 4 or less. Now, while it is capped on that mana 4 or less, it still lets us hit a wide range of important threats, like the One Ring, for example, or another key combo piece that our opponent has. Now, it is important to note that when Skyclave Apparition does leave the battlefield, our opponent will get an illusion token, but honestly, that's a fair trade considering we get an exile effect out of this. Now, we couldn't be upgrading a Final Fantasy deck without adding a Final Fantasy card. Here we have our next edition coming in at $18.10. We have Summon Knights of the Round for 6 colorless and 2 white. We have a 3/3 indestructible enchantment creature, Saga Knight, that has an ability as this saga enters and after your draw step, add a lore counter, sacrifice after the 5th chapter. Its first 4 chapters are all the same. Create 3 2/2 white knight creature tokens, and then its 5th and final chapter, Ultimate End, says other creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. Put an indestructible counter on each of them. So Knights of the Round helps give us board presence and finishing power. Across its first 4 chapters, this saga is going to create a total of 12 2/2 white knight creature tokens. That's 24 power and 24 toughness spread across multiple bodies. These tokens are great for helping us flood the board and apply pressure to our opponents. Then on its 5th and final chapter, we get an enormous payoff. All of our other creatures we control are going to get +2/+2 until end of turn, and each of them will get an indestructible counter. Meaning not only is this ability good for helping us push in for lethal, but it can also help make our board resistant to board wipes and removal. Don't forget, it's also a creature itself that has indestructible, and it only has 3 power, which means if this card ends up in the graveyard, Terra can absolutely recur this back to the battlefield. And if we can play this on the battlefield for 2 mana instead of 8, we're getting insane value. And here we have the last of our removals. Coming in at $1.10, we have Sword to Plowshares for 1 white. We have an instant that says exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. Now, alternatively, you could also put Path to Exile in. It's the other premier white removal piece. Realistically, you should always make room for both of these cards. To give you some perspective, whenever I'm building a deck, and if that deck has white in it, the order of adding cards to the deck usually goes the Commander, Soul Ring, Swords to Plowshares, and Path to Exile. That's how good they are. Now, Swords to Plowshares is going to give our opponent's life equal to the creature's power that we exile, and Path to Exile is going to give them a basic land. Now, while both of these effects offer a small upside to our opponent, they're honestly a small price to pay for how clean and low cost this exile removal is. These are really must-include staples in any white deck, and they really play a key role in helping us control the board and clear the way for Terra. And we've now made it to the removals part of the video, and we're going to kick things off with Angel of the Ruins for 5 colorless and 2 white. We have a 5/7 artifact creature Angel that has flying. When this creature enters, exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. It also has plane cycling for 2. You can pay 2, discard, search your library for a plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So there's no denying that Angel of the Ruins has an amazing enters the battlefield effect. We get to exile up to 2 artifacts and enchantment whenever it hits the battlefield. However, this does cost 7 mana, which is quite expensive, and with it having a power of 5, it's outside of the range of creatures that we can bring back with Terra. That means for the most part, we're almost always having to cast it from hand, which sort of goes against our deck's central theme of reanimating low power creatures for value. Now, while it does have plane cycling, which can be helpful for mana fixing early in the game, we do have other ways to mana fix, such as using treasures. You also need to consider that we are adding cheaper and repeatable options, such as Lorn of the Third Path or Skyclave Apparition, which have similar utility, and those can be brought back with Terra over and over again. And here's our next removal, Coin of Fate for 1 and a white. We have an artifact that says when this artifact enters, surveil 1. You can also spend 3 and a white, tap it, exile 2 creature cards from your graveyard, sacrifice this artifact. An opponent chooses one of the exiled cards. You may put that card on the bottom of your library and return the other to the battlefield tapped. You become the monarch. So for 2 mana, we get to surveil 1 but you really have to invest 6 mana to get the full benefit of what this card does. To activate its main ability, we have to spend 4 mana, tap it, exile 2 creatures from our graveyard, and sacrifice the Coin of Fate. That's a lot of cost and setup for our reanimation effect that doesn't even guarantee we get the creature we want. It also does allow us to become the Monarch, but honestly, that's just not enough to justify how clunky this card kind of is, and the fact that we sort of lose graveyard resources. And here we have the next of our removals, Combustible Gearhulk. For 4 and 2 red, we have a 6/6 artifact creature construct that has first strike. When this creature enters, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If a player doesn't, you mill 3 cards. Then this creature deals damage to that player equal to the total mana value of those cards. Now don't get me wrong, Combustible Gearhulk is a fun and flashy card. However, it's just really expensive and we can't recur it with Terra. 6 mana is a big investment, and while its ETB effect can sound powerful, I don't really like having to give our opponents a choice. When our opponents are choosing, we usually don't get the option that we want. If they let us draw 3, great, but sometimes that's not really what we want in a graveyard focused strategy. And if they choose to take the damage, we do get some mill out of it, but that's a very expensive source of milling. And really, with it being power 6, it's outside of Terra's recursion. If we could bring this card back with Terra, we would probably be having a different conversation. Now don't get me wrong, you can have some explosive turns with Combustible Gearhulk, but our deck really isn't built to maximize on it. Here we have the next of our removals, Edgar, Master Machinist. For 2 colorless, a red and a white, we have a 2/4 legendary creature human, Artificer Noble, that says, once during each of your turns, you may cast an artifact spell from your graveyard. If you cast a spell this way, that artifact enters tapped. It also has tools. Whenever Edgar attacks, it gains +X +0 until end of turn, where X is the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. Now, Edgar does provide some value in artifact-based strategies, but that's not what we're really trying to do with this deck at all. Now, while this can be useful to get back some of our milled artifacts, we don't really run enough artifacts to make this truly worth it, in my opinion. Most of the value we're getting from recursion is going to be coming from the creatures we have in this deck, not artifacts. Now, with having power 2, he is within range for Terra's recursion, but honestly, there's not enough synergy here to justify picking him over any of the other awesome creatures that we have that have powerful enters the battlefield effects. Here we have the next of our removals, Espers to Magicite. For 3 and a black, we have an instant that says, exile each opponent's graveyard. When you do, choose up to 1 target creature card exiled this way, create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's an artifact and it loses all other card types. Now, while this is a clever piece of graveyard hate that allows us to steal something from our opponent's graveyard, the issue is that this card often sits in your hand as you wait for something impactful enough to hit your opponent's graveyard. I think the biggest glaring problem is that it doesn't interact with our graveyard at all. We're a deck built around self-mill recursion, and this card doesn't help fuel that engine or recover any of our own pieces. Now, while this can be a sneaky way to snipe a big creature from our opponent, or deny our opponent the ability to reanimate one themselves, it's just not that consistent for me to justify the slot. Here we have our next removal, Phoenix Down. For 1 white, we have an artifact that says for 1 and 1 white, we can tap it and exile this artifact, choose 1. We can either return target creature card with mana value 4 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, or we can exile target skeleton, spirit, or zombie. Now, Phoenix Down does offer us some low-cost sort of single-use utility. We can either animate a small creature, or we can exile a creature of a specific type. But I think the issue is that if you were to stack this card up against the additions that we're adding, all of our additions just outclass this one. Now, don't get me wrong, we're turning a creature with mana value 4 or less, and as I mentioned, Phoenix Down is a one-time effect, so we would rather add cards that have repeated value. Now, the second mode, being able to exile a skeleton, spirit, or zombie, is just a bit too narrow and unlikely to be relevant in most of your game. I think it's more of a tipping your hat flavor ability than it is more functional. And here we have the next of our removals, Ruin Grinder. For 5 colorless and 1 red, we have a 7/4 artifact creature construct that has Menace. When this creature dies, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards. It also has Mountain Cycling. For 2 colorless. If you pay 2 colorless, discard this card, you can search your library for a mountain card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now, Ruin Grinder might seem appealing at first. It's a big creature with menace, and it allows us to fill up our hand when it dies. However, it doesn't quite add enough synergy to the deck in my opinion. First of all, casting 6 is quite expensive. Not to mention it also has 7 power, so we can't bring it back with Terra's recursion ability at all. Now some people are thinking being able to pitch our hand and draw 7 cards is great. Yeah, it's not bad, except each player can discard their hand and draw 7. That really makes this a double-edged sword. So while it does refill our hand, it does the same for everyone else. That means in some cases it can actually benefit our opponents more than it actually benefits us. Here we have our next removal, Sepulchral Primordial. 4, 5 colorless, and 2 black. We have a 5/4 creature avatar. It has Intimidate. This creature can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or creatures that share a color with it. When this creature enters, for each opponent, you may put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now, while its ETB effect can be quite powerful, 7 mana is quite an investment for it. Also at 5 power, we're not able to recur it with Terra, which is our most reliable form of recursion. This is also another card that stakes its value entirely on what our opponents have in their graveyards. Overall, I think it has a strong effect, but I think it's just in the wrong deck. Here we have the next of our removals, Setzer, Wandering Gambler. 4, 1, a black and a red. We have a 2/2 legendary creature human rogue pilot that has, when Setzer enters, create the Blackjack, a legendary 3/3 colorless vehicle artifact token with flying and crew 2. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, flip a coin. Whenever you win a coin flip, create 2 tapped treasure tokens. So I am a little torn about cutting the card because I think that it is very flavorful and on brand for the character for what it does. But in this deck, he just doesn't align with the strategy or offer enough consistent value. Now, when he does enter, we do get the Blackjack, which is a 3/3 vehicle with flying and crew 2. However, we really don't run a lot of vehicles in this deck. And because of the fact that the Blackjack is legendary, it's not like we can recur him a bunch of times and create a bunch of Blackjacks. You also have to go through quite a bit of hoops to actually get the value. You have to first trigger his ability by using a vehicle to deal combat damage. Then you have to flip a coin, and then you have to win the flip to get the 2 tapped treasures. And here we have the last of our removals. We have Strago and Realm. For 2 colorless and 1 red. We have a 1/3 legendary creature human wizard that has Sketch and Lore. For 2 colorless and a red. You can tap it, target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant, sorcery, or creature card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. If you cast a creature spell this way, it gains haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this creature, activate only as a sorcery. So Strago and Realm essentially lets us steal and cast spells from our opponent's deck. However, in practice, what you'll find out is that this doesn't really mesh with what the deck is trying to do. The ability costs 3 mana to activate, requires tapping it, and it can only be done at sorcery speed, which means it's kinda slow and inefficient. So yet again, this is another card that relies on something our opponents have instead of relying on our own deck. Because this effect can end up being completely random, a lot of times you can end up hitting a spell that you really don't need. Now with only 1 power, we can bring back Strago and Realm with Terra's recursion, but honestly there's little reason for us to bring them back. We've now made it to the no budget options portion of the video, and we're going to kick things off for $43.88. We have Deflecting Swat. For 2 colorless and a red, we have an instant that says, if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. You may choose new targets for target spell or ability. Honestly, Deflecting Swat is one of the best utility spells that you can run in any deck that has red. As long as Terra is on the battlefield, and for the most part we always want her there, we can cast Deflecting Swat for free. Now most often I would say this is used defensively. If an opponent tries to remove Terra or one of our key creatures, or targets us with a harmful spell or ability, we can redirect it to a new target or targets. Most times we usually end up sending whatever it is right back at the person who cast it. But I think what makes Deflecting Swat even better is that it doesn't have to be just defensive. For example, if our opponent casts a big X cost draw spell or a game-breaking ability that targets themselves, we can use Deflecting Swat to steal the value for ourselves instead. It's the kind of card that can completely flip a game in our favor, whether you're trying to protect our own game plan or hijack someone else's. And here we have the next of our no budget options. We have Esper Sentinel. For 1 white, we have a 1/1 artifact creature human soldier that says, whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. Now Esper Sentinel is one of the best 1 mana value creatures that you can play in white. For 1 mana, you get an artifact creature that taxes your opponent's first non-creature spell each turn unless they want to pay mana equal to Esper Sentinel's power. And I can tell you a lot of times they won't, which means you're going to be drawing cards early and often. Esper Sentinel is a great target for Terra's recursion ability. If we happen to mill it early, we can just bring it back for 2 mana and start generating card draw over time. It also can come down on turn 1, which helps us get value before we even cast our commander. We want to be in a situation where we have options in our graveyard, but also options in our hand, and Esper Sentinel really helps with that. And here we have the last of our no budget options coming in at $19.45. We have Opposition Agent. For 2 colorless and a black, we have a 3/2 creature human rogue that has flash. You control your opponents while they're searching their libraries. While an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast them. So Opposition Agent is a brutal piece of disruption that really fits in this deck both strategically and mechanically. So with it having flash, we can drop it in at instant speed. Often we do that in response to some sort of tutor or fetch land or any other sort of search effect, and we completely hijack what our opponent is trying to do. Now, once it's on the battlefield, it really controls how our opponents search their libraries, and instead of getting the cards they want, they exile them, and we get to play them ourselves using mana of any color. Now, what you will find when this card is on the battlefield is that your opponents will just stop searching. Tutors and fetches will get held back, and opponents will play more cautiously until they have a way to remove Opposition Agent, which means by having this on the battlefield, it can really limit our opponent's lines of play. With this card only having power 3, that means Terra can ensure that this remains a threat and never really goes away. And there you have it. After upgrading this deck, we have a final upgrade cost of $72.67. This total does not include the no budget options that we covered. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the Revival Trance Precon. Which other cards should I consider adding to this deck? If there are any cards you think are auto includes, I'd like to hear about it. If you want to see the Final Fantasy Precon decks in action, you can click the video link here and watch me and 3 of my friends battle it out to see which of the Final Fantasy Precon decks take the victory. Until next time, thank you for watching.